Welcome to the Junior Sports Sponsorship Summit, brought to you by the Brand Builders and sponsored by Healthier Choices Canberra. My name is Vicky Saunders and I'm the founder of the Brand Builders. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting today and pay respects to their leaders past, present and emerging. We are privileged and honoured to welcome Chantel Thompson of the Barkindi and Yimba tribe to welcome us to country.
Thank you so much for that welcome, Vicky. Hi everyone, my name is Chantel Thompson and I would like to welcome you to my country, Barkindi and Latchi Latchi country, and I pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which I meet. I pay my respects to all traditional custodians and to all people here today, and I pay our respects to elders, both past, present and emerging, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Chantel. I'm so excited to share this event with all of you, and it's fantastic to see that our audience is a really great mix of people from junior sport, from government, from businesses in the ACT. The Junior Sports Sponsorship Summit is the first public event of the Healthier Choices Canberra Junior Sports Sponsorship Program. The Healthier Choice Canberra program aims to reduce obesity in kids through working with businesses and schools, sporting organisations, to reduce the marketing of unhealthy food and drinks, and to provide healthier food and drink choices for kids and their parents when they're out and about in Canberra. Over the past couple of years, we've been delivering education for junior sports clubs in the ACT to help them navigate the sponsorship journey in a way that empowers them with skills and knowledge to attract the right sponsors and avoid businesses who promote unhealthy food and drink to kids. We've seen clubs of all types and sizes engage sponsorship from really diverse businesses, from cafes right through to construction companies. Tonight, we've brought together three fantastic speakers who truly care about making a positive contribution to the world in all different ways at all levels. And they're going to share with you relevant and timely insights that will help you navigate the landscape of junior sports sponsorship. We want to invite each of you to be part of improving this landscape of junior sport sponsorship in the ACT. So we're going to ask you in a moment to vote in our poll, where you can tell us the kind of topics that you'd most like to learn about in relation to sponsorship. We're then going to host online think tanks in the near future on the four most popular topics. So if you can take a moment now to have a look at the topics that we're offering and choose any of the ones that you're interested in. If there is another topic that you'd like to learn about that we haven't covered here, please use the Q&A function in the menu on your screen. So have a moment to do that. I'll keep talking, but the poll will stay up. We're going to be sending more information about these think tanks in the coming weeks, and we hope that you'll be able to participate in ones that are of interest and relevance to you. Tonight, we're going to be exploring junior sports sponsorship from three different but connected focus areas. Our first speaker is Chantel, and she's going to share on the importance of community and sponsorship. Our second speaker will provide insights on why communication is so important. And our third speaker will explain how and why confidence is key for junior sports clubs when approaching businesses for sponsorship. Before we welcome our first speaker, I'd just like to take this chance to say thank you to each of you for joining us today. I think one of the biggest opportunities amidst everything that's going on in the world is for connection. And we're really glad that you're here connecting with us and with each other. Chantal Thompson is a proud Barkindi and European woman, a proud mother of three beautiful children, including twins. And after being diagnosed with crippling postnatal depression, Chantal took up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to help her heal. Little did she know that a world title and an Olympics wrestling bid would form part of that healing process. From this beginning, Chantal has gone on to win 3 world titles in Jiu-Jitsu, all in her 30s, made a bid for the Rio Olympics, and was selected as an ambassador for the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games. All of this while managing a family of 3, working, earning a double degree in teaching and arts, and a postgraduate certificate in Indigenous trauma and recovery, and starting her own business. She's a strong advocate for equality, human rights, and fighting for what is right. She uses her lived and earned and learning life journey experiences to inspire and empower others. Chantel is a powerful, strong, and passionate woman who is open and shares her story willingly to empower others. I couldn't think of anybody more perfect to bring this unique perspective of athlete, mother, businesswoman, and community figure to share her thoughts on why community is and must be a part of junior sports sponsorship. Welcome, Chantel. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And every time I hear my own bio read out, I'm like, is that really me? It's been a hell of a day so far.
It's impressive. It's just the beginning.
It is. I'm still actively competing, well, not actively competing and training at the moment, but it is definitely in the future forecast. And Jiu-Jitsu's become a family affair.
So then I guess that's a perfect way to lead into my first question. As a parent, what are your thoughts on the concept of the Healthier Choices program and our particular focus on upskilling clubs to be able to avoid sponsors who promote unhealthy food and drink to kids?
I think I grew up in a small town, and the local football and netball club were definitely the hub of the community. And I think seeing the effect of sport, particularly how AFL has continued to fight to remain relevant during COVID, really sees how community sport draws everyone together. And without community sport, you don't have elite sport. So I think it's very, very important to educate clubs on making healthier choices, because a lot of our families and our children need a holistic approach. It can't just be on government, it can't just be on schools, and it can't just be on the family. I think businesses and community sport have a responsibility, but they also have an opportunity. And I know for myself with my own children that by being around these sports, I'm very conscious of not only educating them, but looking to see who is supporting our local clubs. And I'm more aligned to, I guess, the clubs that are more conscious of those choices and taking more responsibility to go, yes, it's harder work, because it is harder work to find healthier choices and more values-driven clubs. But I think without it, it's we're not giving our kids and families the opportunity to create the right pathways forward, and community sports leads to elite sports. And I think we've seen some of the challenges when the right choices aren't made.
Yeah, it might shock you, it might not, to know that 1 in 4 kids in Australia is overweight or obese.
Yep.
Did you know that statistic?
Well, it's not hard when you can go to McDonald's and you can buy a family meal for $40, and yet it's difficult to go to the supermarket and buy everything you need to make a healthy meal for 4 people. So it's very easy to see why we have those statistics.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important part about this program, is that it is about choices, and it is providing, you know, knowledge and education and understanding that we're all working through this together. So do you think, I guess, you know, you've touched on it already, but how important do you think local and junior sport is within a community, like the actual, you know, club environment?
Because I come from a jiu-jitsu club, I've had a different perspective. Like, I stayed away from the football grounds because growing up, I didn't like the alcohol that was always, and the drinking that went on in the older adult levels. But I think with junior sports, we have such a opportunity to re-educate and really do things differently. And I think, especially in this day and age, with statistics and knowledge coming out and the risks of children being obese at such early ages, I think that junior sports is an opportunity to be much more inclusive, and we know children are easily influenced. So if they've got healthier role models and they've got the clubs at a senior level, at the organizational level, making these choices, that flows down to families to go, oh, so this is how they do it. And we know that people, especially a community, it's definitely about the choices of the whole group as opposed to certain individuals. So when a club decides to go, these are the choices we're making, these are our values, that has ripple effects down into empowering families through sport and getting them all involved. It creates a sense of community and belonging as well. I mean, sport is a leveling playing field. It doesn't matter whether you're big, small, particularly around football and netball. We see so many different sizes. I mean, in the Aboriginal community, one of the biggest events is in New South Wales is the Koori Knockout, and in Victoria is the Aboriginal Football Carnival. And people haven't trained all year, but then 2 weeks before they'll get up and they'll start getting healthy because they just want to be out there playing a part of sport. And I think that creating that sense of connection, you're more easily able to influence people. But now we know how influential we can be. I think we can make the right choices, and junior sports is an excellent place to start because we're starting at the beginning, and it's much easier to influence behavior at the beginning than it is at a later age.
Yes, and that's so true. I think that's a theme that comes through so much in the conversation around sponsorship and junior sport, is that it's a safe, trusted environment where there's whole families involved, you know, whether it's the kids playing or, you know, grandparents volunteering. And, you know, I think in the past we've seen exploitation of that, you know, that connection with businesses who've just wanted to get in and, you know, sell to a particular audience. So I think what you're saying is really, not only can we make it inclusive, but that we can actually make positive change from that grassroots level.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to understand that in order to create generational change, you need to start at the grassroots. And we may not be able to influence the elite levels, but the elite levels are not possible without the community levels. So I think when we take back that power, I think there's a greater chance of seeing generational change so much sooner.
Yeah, that's so true. I hadn't actually thought about it from that perspective. I think we're so focused on junior sport in this program. Obviously, it can change the individuals, but it can create, whole generations of change, which is so powerful.
Yeah, and I think particularly in an Indigenous context, it's the whole community, like the community's involved with the child. So when a child becomes influenced and they go home and they say, Mum, I don't want to have any more plastic in my lunchbox, or I'd like to have healthier choices because they see their role models having healthier choices, then Mum's going to pay attention. And if you influence Mum, and sometimes the dad, if the dad's a single parent, but for majority, especially in ethnic families, the mum, you change an entire community and an entire family. And I think that when there's that sense of trust and inclusion within junior sports, that is able for us to reach more groups, minority groups that we haven't been able to reach in the past, especially in small towns.
So I think that is a little bit of the last question that I've got for you, which is, what is one of the ways that you think businesses could benefit from sponsoring a junior sport club? And we know we had a bit of a chat about this before, and I'm really excited to hear your answer on this.
I think with this year, with COVID and with the Black Lives Matters movement, I think we've seen how important diversity and inclusion, but going one step further, having a sense of belonging is becoming to not just Black people and minority groups, but to wider communities across Australia, because when this affects one community, it affects all of us. So I think that when we have junior sports and clubs and communities and towns are working to be more inclusive, when a business starts to invest in those areas and really kind of show up, it's not just about putting the money in, but it's about building the relationships. They open themselves up to different markets. They create a different sense of trust and opportunity. And I think that's so important, because cultural diversity is becoming more and more, we already know the science behind it, the statistics, that the more culturally diverse your business is, let alone your marketing, your customers, it's your business is just going to expand and grow. And I think that's even more so visible and an opportunity now in junior sports.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And it's so interesting, isn't it? When we start to think strategically, if we just go, let's be a business and let's just think about how we can grow our business or how we can make sales, and we're just talking about commercial outcomes and strategy, more and more so these days, that also includes community, and it includes concepts such as diversity and inclusion and accessibility. And it's a wonderful thing that we can be super successful businesses, and we can be junior sports clubs who are just, you know, going to get sponsorship because it's what we need to survive and give our members a great experience. But guess what? We get to do amazing things in the community, in the world, and, you know, carry positive messages.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing more and more bigger businesses really starting to stand by their values, because consumers have choice now with online shopping and access to things like Amazon and everything else. If you want people to buy local and stay local, you have to be more relevant, and you can't do that by competing with the big guys. But what you can do, you can be competitive by being values based, by being relationship based. And if you're around junior sports, there's a certain level of responsibility now. We have things like working with children's checks, and people are starting to hold their own accountability to have that influence in terms of what they're bringing to the market and who they're advertising to. And I think parents and coaches are becoming more conscious of their responsibility in that space. So businesses do have a real opportunity to become more relevant and powerful at a grassroots level by investing in junior sports.
Yeah, I really agree with everything that you've said. And we just got a beautiful comment through from one of our audience. Let me just have a look. Cal said, brilliantly said, Chantel. I think that's just a general thing. I think that was about your last comment. But I agree. And I think, you know, you're someone where you're immersed in the business world, you're immersed in sport, you're immersed in family and community. And that's why it felt so important to get you to share, because you bring perspective from almost every side of the table. So I was just wondering, like, in terms of, you know, as a parent and as a consumer, so we're just going to put different hats on you, and you are a woman you wear a lot of hats. Do you think that's the right term?
I hold a lot of different roles that kind of, they stand alone, but they also weave together very tightly.
Yeah. And you're not part of those things, you're all those things.
Yeah, they're not one or the other. They all kind of complement each other, and they're all a part of each other.
Mm. So when you're thinking, and I guess maybe you can't separate the two, but from the perspective of a parent and a consumer at a sports club, how would you feel if there was a local business that sponsored that club, but you had the alternative to buy the same product or service online? How much would their sponsorship of the club influence your decision, whether you'd buy from them locally or you'd go online?
I think now, being a small business owner myself, I've often had conversations educating people now when people make comments, oh, that's so expensive. But I understand the cost of production as a small business. But knowing that a small business is taking the time and the energy and the effort to invest in something outside of themselves, I am 100% more likely to go and buy from a club that's supporting my kids' club or a local club, because as a parent, but also coming from an Indigenous community, but working with at-risk communities, I understand how expensive sport can be. And by sponsorship, you make it possible for kids that might not have been able to play sport. You make that possible for them. So I'm 100% going to support them, but I'm also going to bring my family and my community with me, and I'm going to promote them through my social media channels, because I, as an athlete, as a business, I've lost money because I've stood by my values, but I also understand you're playing a long-term game, and it may not pay off immediately, but when you're investing in families, those kids grow up, and we know that with football teams, they get handed down through the generations. And I think so do relationships, and people are growing and becoming more aware. So the opportunities are only going to do so as well.
Yeah, completely agree with you. I don't think there's anything I disagree with there. Chantel, thank you so much. Thank you for being part of this event. I love what you've contributed, and I know that the audience will have loved it and gained so much from it. So thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone that's showing up and putting in the effort in this space. I think it's so important, and it's easy not to do. It's a lot harder to do it, but I think the investment is worth it. So thank you to everyone that's contributed and come along today.
Well said. Thanks, Chantal. So our next speaker, Andrew Top, has been a pharmacist for 30 years. He joined the Capital Chemist Group in 2001. And in that time, he's been involved working with 10 different pharmacies. He and his family moved to Canberra in 2015, where he moved into the role of Group Business Manager for Capital Chemist. And that group includes over 40 service-oriented pharmacies in the eastern states. Andrew strongly believes in the positive outcomes that pharmacies can provide to their individual patients and communities. And Capital Chemist are active sponsors of junior sport in the ACT already. His focus tonight will be on why communication is so important to successful sponsorships. Good evening, Andrew. How are you?
Good evening, Vicky. Good evening, everyone.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's great. I think, so I guess everyone that's listening and watching, I've had conversations with our speakers to make sure that they're the right people for this event. We want to know that we're getting really great information and insights. It's going to help junior sport and business do great things together in the ACT. So Andrew, I just felt you were perfect for that. You bring, again, you bring different perspectives to the table. And I'd just love to know, I guess briefly, why Capital Chemist started investing in sport. So why you shifted from, I guess, more traditional marketing to sport, and then specifically junior sport.
So the shift out of traditional advertising, television, radio, newspaper, started in about 2005 because we weren't necessarily seeing a return from it. And we made a conscious effort to formalise the ad hoc relationships that we had with community organisations, which every pharmacy has. They will be quite likely to support the local football team or the local regional show or whatever. So we stopped spending as much money on regular advertising and put the money into a bucket, which we actually call the bucket. And then we formalised relationships with, well, now it's up to about 40 organisations. We did have a big relationship with ACT Cricket, which covered juniors right through to first grade. But we made a conscious decision when that was sort of nationalised and control of cricket was taken away from the ACT. We became quite a small fish in a very big pond, and we didn't feel the connection with the organisation. So we decided consciously to approach sporting organisations, particularly junior sport. The previous speaker did talk about how mums are heavily involved in running sport. They run the kids around, they buy the uniforms. Our mums are our primary customer. They're looking after possibly sick kids, they're looking after husbands who can't quite manage their own medical affairs, and then they're probably keeping an eye out for their older parents as well. So we love mums, and so we just felt that it was a logical place for us to effectively brand ourselves, but also to demonstrate our commitment to community health. And I think now we're involved in probably 10 junior sports in the ACT, from little ones like mountain biking, although there's more people involved in that than I expected, right through to big ones like soccer and netball and AFL.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think I really love that you guys thought about, well, exactly like what I was saying with Chantal, let's be strategic, let's get bang for our buck. We're spending money on advertising, let's get results. But you know your customer and you care about your customer as well. So it's two things, you're providing an incredible service, not just to the community, but also, your target market of mums, in that respect, that you're there when they need you. You're there when they need to grab something because they've got a sick kid, or they're rushing to school and they need to buy something for themselves. So there's that real relationship that already exists. And it's just then, I guess, joining the dots and putting it together. And I think, one of the things that I love about your organization's approach to sponsorship is that you're going in at that grassroots level. Like you said, when it got national, when you were with cricket and it became a national thing, and you were a small sponsorship relationship for them, you shifted it so that you could be more impactful and more connected at that grassroots level.
And that is definitely an experience we've had even outside of the sport area, where Canberra's not a huge city. It's a nice city, but it's not a huge city. And a lot of our local branches of national charities have been subsumed into the Sydney office, and we cease to be a force or to be acknowledged. So we've actively sought new relationships in the non-sport space as well. So
yeah, and I love that what you've said should be something that pricks up the ears of the people in businesses and in junior sports clubs who are joining us today, because this is not about how big your club is or how big your business is. This is about finding that relevant connection with a group or a particular type of person that's your target market, or for a club, it's your membership, and finding those relationships that make sense. And it doesn't need to be a sport that's on TV. Cricket's on TV. That wasn't the right connection for you. So I think
if we could find junior golf,
yeah.
it is junior golf, we would be happy to receive an application. Just one thing for us, because we're 22 stores across the ACT, we tend not to do it for an individual team. That's our personal choice, because we need, the money's coming from all the stores. So we need to make sure we're not too parochial and just look after a Belconnen team at the expense of a Dixon team or a Tuggeranong team. So we tend to engage with the head office organisations of the sports.
Yeah.
But we also acknowledge that some of them are run on the smell of an oily rag. They're one or two people probably in volunteer roles. So we like to make sure that we develop those relationships and nurture them. I mean, without making it sound like the other ones aren't good, our best one by a mile is netball. The execution from netball in terms of acknowledgement and messaging and branding and, dare I say it, thanks from netball is spectacular. It is far and away the biggest bang we get for our buck.
Is that netball ACT?
Netball ACT. I mean, we're the sponsor of the Junior Championships, which would normally be held in June, but for COVID, didn't happen this year, but will be on in a modified way over a few weekends, starting this weekend, I believe. I'll be presenting prizes on Sunday. So that return on investment, which I know is very, very hard to define, just as it's hard to define, did I get $1 from that TV advertisement? I don't know. Did I get $1 from junior netball? I actually think I did, because the coverage was great. But I also get a warm and fuzzy, and that's important as well. But it's really, really important that the relationship have targets and deliverables on both sides, and that they be followed through on, because if they're not, it does tend to leave a bit of a bad taste in the mouth, and maybe we won't be back next year.
Absolutely. And I think, and that's why I chose, it just naturally happened that communication was the umbrella for our talk, with you and I today, because it just kept coming through. Everything you told me about your experiences with sponsorship and what worked and what didn't, communication just seemed to be the thing. Just going back to what you were saying about netball, it does sound like they gave you some clear activities or activations that, had been agreed upon, but you said that they said thanks. And
yes, acknowledgement, and you can acknowledge it 6 months later as well. I mean, the joy of social media, it is a gift that's relatively easy to keep on giving. But thanks and acknowledgement is the other side of the equation, in a relatively public way, if possible. I've got 71 bosses in my organisation, and some of them are very happy to be involved in philanthropy and be quiet and reserved about it, but others do expect to see a visible return. And as I said, dollars are sometimes hard to measure, but a visible thanks, a public thanks and acknowledgement is really important. And then the upside of that is that when we go into a meeting with governments, they know who we are. With the Chamber of Commerce, the really significant businesses based in Canberra, they know Capital Chemist because of our involvement in, dare I say it, in most of their kids' lives.
That's
from
fantastic.
dispensing prescriptions, but also from sponsoring their netball or their mountain biking.
Yeah, that is brilliant. You can't measure that for $1, exact dollar value, but brand awareness, that's a huge part of sponsorship and relationship building. You've got that level of people like you, they know you, they like you, they trust you. before you've even said hello, because they associate you with that brand.
That trust side of things delivers, and it's priceless.
Yeah.
It delivers value well beyond a definable dollar.
Yeah. And I think that actually ties back in perfectly, or dovetails back in, for want of a better phrase, it dovetails back in with that concept that a sports club, a junior sports club especially, is an environment of trust. And so as a junior sports club person, you know, if you're responsible for getting sponsorship, you want to preserve that trust. Like, that's your value right there. And if you just go and get any old sponsors, you're potentially impacting that in a negative way, so that other sponsors may not be able to benefit from that trust. Like, you're actually tarnishing it. So the more that you can align your sponsors with your club's values and vice versa, that trust gets, you know, built and sustained, and it is a very valuable asset.
We have declined sponsorship offers where there's been maybe unhealthy food choices as part of other people that we'd be associated with arrangements.
Yeah.
Because that's not the message that we want to send.
Because it's relationships, isn't it? So if you're in a relationship with this organization and they're in a relationship with that organization, you get lumped into the same basket.
Potentially, yes.
Yep. I really like that. And it's hard because I know a lot of junior sports clubs, you know, they are volunteer based, like you mentioned before. And when someone says we'd like to sponsor you, it's so easy and tempting to say yes, please, because we need the money, because we don't have the time to go and get other sponsors. But I always like to say, like, if you're holding on to the wrong thing, it's stopping you from being able to grab onto the right thing. And it might mean that sometimes, like you say, you knock back an opportunity, but then you're freeing yourself up for the right ones. So yeah. We've talked about communication as being a really important part of the sponsorship relationship. Could you talk us through what happened a little earlier this year? You and I talked about this, how you responded to a pretty challenging situation. So
the Capital Chemist COVID experience has been challenging, and look, for everybody on this, it's been challenging too. Completely uncharted territory, but by sheer fluke, we happened to be in a group conference just as society started to shut down, when we sort of came to realise, oh, we're going to go into lockdown. And so we spent a couple of days planning for what that would be, what that would look like. So we sort of came out a little bit on the front foot. We knew what social distancing was before anybody else did, for instance. But we also thought, well, what's our community program going to look like when there's no kids' sport being played, or there's no dementia walk around Lake Burley Griffin, or the Men's Link breakfast and all the other events that we sponsor. So we very, very quickly got on the phone to email to all of our 40 odd relationships and said, look, your money's safe. You've either had your annual donation or you'll get it in due course. We'll be here on the other side when we get out the other side, which we're sort of getting to that point now. Things are starting to happen again. All we could ask from them is to continue with that acknowledgement and accept that we would probably send a similar message. Remember, so instead of talking about the 2020 Netball Junior Championships, we talked about, do you remember the 2019 ones, how good they were? And so we sent messages that way, just effectively to keep the dream alive. And I think our charities or organisations that we sponsor appreciated that, because, gosh, they're feeling pain.
Yeah. And I again, like, it was communication. You know, you had that connection, that communication. You didn't just say, oh, we just, you know, let them be. You communicated with them. You demonstrated what communication looks like, and they responded in turn by being active on social media, carrying those messages and staying active and involved and connected with you in a different way.
I suppose it's important to note that from a donor organisation's perspective, it's not set and forget. We don't want the organisation just to take the money and then disappear into the night. But similarly, we as the donor of the money have to activate. We need the contact, the two-way communications about the events, the pictures, the stories, the triumphs. We need resources at our end to make sure that the message that we want to send on behalf of netball or cricket or soccer or whoever is actually happening. Because if we don't give that, it's a bit of a one-way street. We want a two-way street.
Yeah, and you shouldn't have to be searching online to see if somebody posted about you. You'd want them to be letting you know that they have, or letting you know in advance that they're going to.
Yeah. So both sides need to be involved in that.
Yeah, definitely. So is that something that I'd love to know your process, not in huge detail because we've got 4 minutes, but what would be your process with a new sports organisation that you were sponsoring to set those expectations and those plans up for the year?
Oh, it's almost like dating. There's a little sort of tentative dance, maybe a little bit of coffee, maybe a meeting via Zoom to sort of see if there is potentially an alignment, to see if our expectations match. What does the organisation want? What are we willing to get? Because if they want 100 grand and we've got 2, that's pretty pointless. And then typically the organisation comes back with a couple of different proposals, maybe pitched at different levels based on the suggestion as to where we've told them is appropriate. And then I answer to a board. They make the decision as to where that money will get spent. And from start to finish, we could have a relationship formalised within a couple of months. We typically would have a relatively simple but formal document setting out what each party's expected. We will give you X amount of dollars and you will give us X amount of Facebook posts or sponsorship rights or a sign at the ground, whatever it is, whatever's on the two sides of the equation. And then we keep hassling basically, because we want that ongoing relationship. We do have a community program manager who helps with that, and we have an external advertising agency who we link them up with the appropriate person from the various organisations.
Yeah, great. Look, that sounds, that's exactly the way that we recommend that things happen, that you essentially have a checklist for that duration of that relationship, and hopefully you don't have to do too much hassling and chasing. Obviously it's part of it, I guess, in some respects, but I would imagine that there would be some organisations that you don't need to chase, and they're maybe the preferred relationships or the ones that might more likely to be renewed in future years. Yeah. And we do have 2 minutes left, and I just want to keep picking your brain because it's fascinating. What would you say about, a club that came to you and maybe they don't have a huge audience, they don't have heaps of membership? Do you think, I'm not telling all the clubs to come and approach you, but is that always the most important thing for you, that they've got a massive audience?
I will be honest and say the larger the audience, the better.
Okay.
The ACT curling, junior curling organisation, which probably has 3 people in it, probably won't get a Guernsey. Noting that individual stores, possibly through their own staff's relationships, they're also encouraged to make, they're the ones that might do the small team as opposed to the big league.
Yep, great.
So in our situation, size does tend to count, and geographic spread as well. Yeah. We can't spend too much money in one area over another.
No, but that's exactly what I was kind of hoping that you'd say, because it's horses for courses, isn't it? So while, I think people can often get a little bit frustrated with sponsorship because they keep going to different organisations that everybody else goes to, such as Capital Chemist, and wonder why they're getting knocked back, but they maybe need to look at it from a slightly different angle. Maybe it's not Capital Chemist that we go to, maybe it's one of the chemists, or maybe it's one of the local products that stocked in Capital Chemist. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, I suppose.
And I suppose with 40 people on the line, there might be a bit of excitement that, Capital Chemist will give us money. We do have a budget as well. It's defined. We know how much we have to spend, and we set those budgets a year in advance. And it's a discussion we can have, but it's not an open checkbook.
Absolutely.
We need to develop those relationships. So
yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew. That was great. I wish that we had longer. It's only a 1-hour event, but really, really appreciate your time and the valuable insights that you've given. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you. Our next speaker, Warren Apps, is regarded as one of Canberra's most strategic marketing and advertising minds. He was twice named one of the top 5 advertising professionals in Australia, and his ability to see the bigger picture and take a thoughtful, considered approach to everything he does, from strategic planning, business advisory, media and branding, has earned him the trust and respect of an impressive range of clients. After 15 years of working for multinational marketing agencies, Warren joined Coordinate as partner and director to lead some of Canberra's most recognised brands across media, retail, energy, land development, property and government. In the sports space, he has advised numerous well-known brands, including the Canberra Capitals, Canberra Raiders, ACT Brumbies, the Brisbane Broncos and the GWS Giants. That's a mouthful. Warren is a regular media commentator on marketing and media issues and a previous president of the Australian Marketing Institute. Warren's going to be focusing on why confidence is so important for junior sports clubs seeking sponsorship. Hi Warren, how are you?
Vicky, how are you?
Very good, thank you. You bring a really unique perspective on junior sports sponsorship. Could you give us a bit of background, I guess, about what you bring to the table?
Sure, and I guess it's a number of perspectives, really. I'm, as you said, a director of the largest marketing consultancy in the ACT, and on that basis, I, for a living, advise clients on their marketing investment. We're currently advising on around $15 million a year in marketing expenditure annually in this market. And that cuts across all channels, from advertising to content marketing to social media and indeed to sponsorship at all levels. And so I guess for that reason, I've had a front row seat to the sort of the decision-making process that goes on when brands are weighing up these decisions. But as you said, in addition to that, I've also had quite a bit to do with sports. So we've developed a fairly strong sports marketing practice, and I've worked with lots of brands in that space, but I've also been involved in sports club management and ownership. So we were part of the group of people that resurrected the Canberra Knights Ice Hockey Club about 6 years ago and rebirthed it as the CBR Brave, which went on to some significant success. And we really rebuilt that franchise. A key part of that was building a much stronger sponsorship base. And I guess for all those reasons, I've got a real appreciation for the power of sport to connect people with each other, but also with sponsors.
Yeah, and I guess you're a little bit like me. I come from a corporate/marketing background, and so your existing or prior knowledge helps you with navigating sponsorship, you know, when you need to do that for your sports club, and to be on those different sides of the table. If you know what they want, then you know what to offer, and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think understanding both sides of the equation is actually really important, because as I'm sure I'll talk about later, most sports clubs don't understand the power of the asset that they're sitting on.
Yes.
And most marketers are only now really starting to realise how to leverage sponsorship to its greatest effect.
Yeah, I feel like I've been shouting that for about 10 years. Like, you don't know how amazing you are, and you don't know how amazing they are. Like, come on. But, you know, these things take time, and it is people like you who are changing things. You're changing that landscape, and it's people like our audience who are part of changing that landscape. And when we've got that shared knowledge and understanding, then we can change stuff. So what do you think has changed in sponsorship over the years, and has it improved for junior sports clubs who are seeking sponsorship?
Oh, I think it has. I think I've noticed a real change probably in the last 5 years. It probably began about 5 years ago, particularly from larger brands who had in the past perhaps been active in sponsorship, but only at the elite and professional level. And they started to kind of, I guess, get a sense of the mood of the community in terms of the evolving community expectations around where brands are placing their sponsorship dollars. And so I can see a more active shift happening in terms of that sponsorship investment broadening out, and that includes broadening out to junior sport, but also to other categories like women's sport, niche sport, disadvantaged sport, and others. So I can see a real, spreading of the pie there starting to happen.
I agree.
Yeah, I think there's a real recognition that while those tier one sports might have the scale and the reach, it's also very expensive. I think there's a growing recognition that junior and local sport is more impactful. It offers more of a genuine connection to the community, and that genuine connection is actually driving purchase decisions now. So I don't think it's all altruistic. I think there's certainly part of that. I think there's, most brands do want to connect in a more meaningful way. But I think there's just also this growing understanding about the marketing potential for categories like junior sport, women's sport, and others. And I think there's probably a couple of key reasons for that. The first is cut through. One of the greatest challenges we face as marketers in the modern marketing environment is that we're in a very cluttered world. Most consumers are exposed to about 5,000 messages a day. And so the number one challenge for marketers is how do you cut through that clutter and actually connect. Junior sport or grassroots sport still offers a relatively uncluttered environment. And so I think there's recognition of that. But I think the smart marketers also recognise the potential reach and influence of junior sport. Andrew mentioned the power of mums. We call that audience the chief family officer, and it can be, usually it's the mum, the dad, or both of school-age children. And the reason why that's the most valuable audience for marketers right now, and Andrew touched on it, is because of influence. That's a group that are obviously making their own purchasing decisions, but they're also influencing brand choice and purchasing decisions of their own children and their own parents. And for the first time, we're now seeing that audience have essentially influence over three generations. And so that chief family officer audience that Andrew spoke about is certainly where I think that's an audience that's at the centre of junior sport. I think it's very powerful. There's also the question of scale, though, to consider. I think the junior sport as a category, if I look at just Canberra on its own, is a significant category. 50,000 kids participate in organised sport in Canberra every year, and if you multiply that out to the family unit, you're probably looking at junior sport touching 200,000 Canberrans. So as a category, it's actually got quite a lot of scale.
Yes, and something that you just said before was about the challenge of cutting through, and that's one of the biggest problems or challenges that face marketers. It's something like, is it like 4 or 5 touch points before you make a purchase or something like that?
It depends on the category and
the
stage of the buying cycle you're in, but that's right. Not only have you
multiple,
you've got to reach them multiple times.
Yeah, so it makes sense that, and I can't believe I've never thought of this before, but you're going to the sports club weekly or a few times a week. There's your multiple touch points. And it can be different ways, the product or meeting the people or seeing a banner.
And I think what makes it so powerful is, in fact, the most powerful driver in terms of consumer purchasing or decision making is emotion. And you can't get a more emotional touch point than kids playing junior sport and the connection that parents have with that. So I think it's very powerful.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, that sort of ties back to the whole premise of the our program around junior sports sponsorship, about protecting it, about making it a safe space for kids and families where there aren't conflicting messages or conflicting values. The Healthier Choices campaign isn't controlling any clubs. It's not telling them what they do or don't have to do. It's giving them this kind of education and understanding and some guidelines around what might be right for them based on their values and based on their membership and their audience. So I just think this kind of knowledge is so important for clubs to have. And it leads me into the question of, why do you think that so many junior sports clubs are still struggling so much with sponsorship?
I think there are a range of reasons for that, both on the sports, but also in terms of access to opportunities. So I think on the sports side, it's no surprise that resources are clearly focused on operations, and as you'd expect, sponsorship is largely a volunteer effort, and those personnel change frequently, so it can be hard to devote the time and also to build those sort of longer term relationships. So I think that's a key issue that we need to address. But also, I think the other blockage is access to the opportunities. It's not easy. You know, it's much easier for a brand that's got money to spend to pick up the phone and talk to a TV station, or to run boost a post on Facebook or whatever. It's much harder to go through the process Andrew spoke about in terms of seeking out a potential sporting club that might have some values alignment or an audience reach that you're seeking for, and then go through that process. So I think those two things combine to make that a little bit difficult. I think there's also a lack of recognition within grassroots or junior sporting clubs about, and I've touched on this before, about the value of the marketing asset, if I can call it that they're actually sitting on. When executed right, junior sport as a sponsorship vehicle can be a very powerful marketing tool. And yet I still think most sports organisations approach sponsorship with a bit of a charity mindset. Instead of asking for help, they should be selling the opportunity, and I think that relates to the theme we want to talk about, which is confidence. I think there's a real opportunity to build some self-belief and really clear on the value we can offer. We're not just shaking the bucket and asking for donations. We're actually selling access to our community, and that's something that we shouldn't take lightly, and it's a responsibility. I think Chantel said it's a responsibility that we have, but it's also an asset that can be sold. So I think on the client side, as I said, we've got to find an easier way for marketers to connect with these clubs and find the opportunities. If they were easier to find and easier to buy, I think we'd see an immediate uplift in the dollars flowing in sport for all the reasons I just mentioned.
And it's interesting, we've had businesses contact us through this program saying, we want to sponsor junior sports clubs. Where are they? And they're all around you, but you don't know. And it's exactly that mechanism of, how do you connect? And it's a lot of, awareness on both sides, and then that ability to connect and collaboratively come up with what the value exchange is, because we know the value is there on both sides. We know that marketing has changed, sponsorship has changed. Sponsorship dollars are now everything from staff well-being and engagement and training to community activities and advertising, and it's not just a little bucket of sponsorship money, it's all of the different areas of the business. So exciting. I'm so grateful that you took the time to share your insights with us tonight, and I really love that you are able to relate it, I guess, back to that high corporate level, but also that grassroots level, because this is Canberra, or the ACT isn't a huge place, but you've got all of those different aspects of it. So it's good to be able to understand the different perspectives. And for clubs just to be able to know that, yes, there are opportunities out there, and yes, you do have value.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Warren. And sadly, we come to the end of our event today. So I want to thank all of the fantastic speakers. I hope that our audience got lots of ideas. And I wonder, what was the one thing that stood out for you? Was there something that you heard that you thought, oh, we can do that, or we should do that? Or was there something that gave you a sense of reassurance that you're doing things right? Like, yes, I know that we're doing that good. I'm glad to know we're on the right track. Feel free to drop a comment in the chat or in the Q&A. Or you can send us an email after the event. I'll give you our email address in a moment. We really would love for each of you to continue being part of improving the landscape of junior sports sponsorship in the ACT. We're going to ask you, again, if you haven't done so, to vote in our poll in just a moment. And that's where you can tell us which topics that you'd most like to learn about in relation to sponsorship. We're going to be hosting online think tanks in the near future on the 4 most popular topics. And we're also going to send you more information about these soon. We're also going to be sharing a link with you in the chat where you can access some of our fantastic resources on junior sports sponsorship. And we'll send you this in an email as well. If you've got any questions or feedback, or you'd like to get in touch with me or any of the speakers, please email us at hello@thebrandbuilders.com.au, or you can reply to any of the correspondence that you've received from us so far. And to close out today's session, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Healthier Choices Canberra, and to thank each of you for your time tonight. I encourage you to stay connected in this program so that we can work together to improve the landscape of junior sports sponsorship in the ACT together. Thank you everyone, and have a lovely evening.